So, the shaking is coming. Now, that's the book of Hebrews in portion and part. Let me talk a little bit here at the end about some things that I feel like I need to share. I talked a little bit about this earlier. The Lord speaking to me, an encounter recently where the Lord was talking to me about Him rocking our world. Now, I want to say something to you that I do not believe. I've said this all along. I do not believe that this is a major shaking. I believe it is small. I believe it is a shaking, but a minor shaking. And a part of the primary purpose, if we can see this and hear this from the Lord, is on the church. On our hearts. And a test to see if we value the internal and the Lord Himself more than we value our stuff and our meetings and our buildings and our forms of Christianity and our ways in our meetings and all those things. If we value the outward, if we value the social more than we value the Lord Himself. Church in our nation has become largely a social activities affair. Meeting type of affair. And if we're going to use that language, it is an affair. We have drifted away from the Lord Himself. And these things become our need. We need this and we need that. And we need to be together. And what we need is the Lord. That's going to have to come first. Or our coming together is just going to be about us. No glory to God in it. No increase of, hear me, no glory to God in it. No increase of Christ in us in it. No heavenly focus. If ever, my friends, there has been a time for sobriety, it is now. And this little small shaking should be showing us there that people have believed wrongly without, I can't understand it myself because history shows this to us plainly. There's always been shakings. There's always been difficulties. History's filled with things, wars and rumors of wars, and the 1900s saw 2 world wars. It saw a pandemic in 1918 that killed at least 50 million people worldwide. The numbers are more like 100 to 150 million. They don't know how many died. 1918. Also had World War I during that time. World War II started in the 1930s. For our nation, that was followed by the Korean War. And then the Vietnam War. Then we had the 1990s and what went on there in Iraq first time around. I'm just looking at this. There's always been difficulties. We've seen difficulties throughout history. If you study and read history, difficulties don't go away. They are a part of history and the journey of history. Then you look at biblical history and you see difficulties and you see judgments of God upon His own people time after time after time. When Christianity is tethered to the same worldly promises, same worldly hopes, and same worldly foundations as the world, then God is going to shake. And if you don't believe that's happened, just read read chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation, where you see that 5 out of 7 of the churches are coming under the direct judgment of the Lord. They're being condemned by the Lord. 5 out of the 7 churches. Tell me that that's not the church losing its way, even at that point. That things are already entering in to where things are not on the ground that they should be. 5 out of 7 churches in the book of Revelation 2 and 3 incur the rebukes of the Lord. It's said of Sardis that they're just dead. They have a reputation of life, but they're dead. But that's a distinction between the life of Christ and church life. Oh, you've got church life, but you don't have Christ as life. You're dead. Anyway, there is, again, a greater shaking than this coming. I said this a couple of weeks or so ago. If I was to look, and we're going to revisit that for a moment, at the 2020s, from 2020 to 2029, stopping with 2030. If I was to look at the next 10 years, I want to make a distinction in this. I believe that this decade will prove, not just in this nation, but in the nations, to be the most difficult of decades. What do you mean by that? You mean worse than the Depression? I do. Do you mean worse than even the world wars? I do. Not necessarily because of war, but war will be a part. Not necessarily because of economic downturn, even though that too will be a part. Not necessarily because of the disruption in governments across the nations, but yes, that will be a part. Those things will be a part. The disruption, let's say it this way, the judgment on the house of God and the arising of religion that is compromised from its beginning, that its main focus is unity. Did you hear that? A religion that's main focus is unity. Behind it is not the Spirit of God, but a man-pleasing spirit. A spirit of compromise. A spirit where there's no absolutes. It's every man believing what he wants to with just the generic God, hear me, the generic God tag, but Christ will be offensive, and Christ, Jesus Christ, will not be tolerated in that religion. Because Christ, not the real Jesus Christ, may be a form of Him dialed down to where He's just a good man, but He's not the eternal Son of God. That's what they'll say. Folks, He is the eternal Son of God. He is the absolute. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but by Him. But I'm warning us of a unity religion that dials everything back so that all can be a part and no one feels left out. Absolutes are gone. Jesus Christ is not who I believe He is, wholeheartedly, beyond any argument. And many of you do as well who are listening. That thing is already arising, a coexist type of thing. Let's just love each other. What love are you talking about? Are you talking about the love of God, or are you talking about human love? You are surely talking about human love. Because you can't love God without loving His Son and understanding His Son. The love of God comes to us through that Son. And if you're denying that Son, the love of God is not in you. Christ isn't in you, the love of God's not in you. But that kind of love is not, oh, let's just all get along kind of love. It is a very demanding love of loving God supremely, wholeheartedly. He being first love. He being in control. He being our life. He being everything to us. He offers Himself to us, giving Himself to us. Anyway, let me go on. So I look at the 2020s and the difficulties. Let me say this. I'm going to talk about two different things here. There's what's going to happen in this nation, and then there's what's going to happen in the entire world. We are seeing in this little shaking what I would call, what was shown to me to be a swell. Like, not a wave, but a swell of water. It was not pointed like a wave would be pointed. It was a swell, and it had length across the top of the swell of the water, which means this. That swell with that kind of length means that this is going to be a lengthy thing. I'm not saying how long. It already has been. But it's not over. It's going to be lengthy. Following this swell was a small wave. It came and went quickly. Followed by another larger wave, about twice the size of the small wave. It too came and went quickly. Followed by a swell much larger than this one. That was in the vision, in the experience, from horizon to horizon. That means that its horizon is much larger than this present one, this present swell, much larger than those two small waves. But that large swell that I was shown is but a beginning of great difficulty. Now, the judgments of God, the Scripture says this, are daily in the nations. This nation and other nations as well. Judgments in the house of God. I believe this being one of them. It's not all that this is, but it is a judgment in the house of God. It's more than that to the world, but it's also a judgment in the house of God. It is showing us, too, how shakeable. We thought, well, our economy is doing great. It's not shakeable. Think again. These things could not happen. Think again. And this is a small one, small swell. There are judgments in this nation that are coming over the next. I'm going to be rather specific, but not necessarily precise, but rather specific. There are judgments that are coming to this nation over the next 2 to 3 years. And then, moving beyond that, in the 2020s, there are judgments coming to the nations. Now I'm looking at individual nations versus all nations for a moment. Individual nations versus all nations. Speaking of our own nation, there will be judgments in this nation of varying sizes. But I would say this to you, over the next 2 to 3 or so years, 4 years, they're not biblical type judgments. This is not a biblical type judgment. People may be saying that, but it's not true. And when a biblical type judgment arrives on the scene, we'll know the distinction. And they are coming. That's my point. So we're going to have judgments in this nation over the next several years of varying degrees. It is certainly not the end. This is not the end. This is not even that the Lord showed me years ago. I was thinking and listening to this the other day. My friend John Paul Jackson, who's with the Lord, prophesied 10 years ago, a little bit over that, of what would happen in 2020. And it is happening. Now, he caught a lot of flack. I was around him. We were good friends, and I was around him in a corporate setting when people were directly challenging what he was saying and saying, oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Well, it did happen. And it is happening. John Paul was extremely gracious in those moments. It shocked me, because he was talking and was interrupted. For them, oh, it's not going to happen, not going to happen. Well, it did, and it is. That's not all that John Paul saw. This is not all that John Paul saw. He knew, as I did. We conferred on a number of things because the Lord showed us some of the very same things, as he did with others. Sadhu, out of India. Neville Johnson, who's now with the Lord. David Wilkerson, and others. David Wilkerson talked about a pandemic coming to New York City. Some people think, hey, he's a false prophet. What do you think about it now? What do you think about David now? So many things that David Wilkerson was shown of the Lord has already come to pass. And some of the things are just in front of us. Anyway, my point is not to defend those guys. I didn't know David Wilkerson personally. I know John Paul Jackson personally, and I know Sadhu personally, and I knew Neville personally, and others who spoke, Bob Jones, and others who spoke of these things. No matter what you think about them personally, whether you know them or not, or all that you've heard about them, there were things said that I know of that have come to pass, and more of it's coming. My point is this, though. Getting back to John Paul. John pinpointed 2020 as a specific year when the things would start specifically that he was seeing. He was being specific. I'm dealing with the perfect storm now. Now it's coming out in the news in some of the things calling this the perfect storm. I've read it. Perhaps you have as well. John Paul's been gone for a few years, but what God showed him is still happening. My friends, let me get to something before we end here. Let me say this clearly. If we have in this nation, America, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I would encourage you to not waste those years arguing as to what's coming and what's not coming. I would encourage you to inwardly let the Lord go deep and do His work. Listen to me, Church of America. Get out of your play mode and become sober. Get out of your fun-loving mode and become sober. It doesn't mean you can't ever have any fun, but I'm saying we're in a fun-loving play mode, and these should be sobering times. We are coming into sobering times. We're coming into more and more difficult times. Even going out beyond the 2, 3 or so years, in the years following, the rest of the 2020s, it's going to get increasingly difficult in the 2020s. Increasingly difficult. Difficulties are going to be increasing. Difficult times will be in the 2020s. Very difficult times. We will begin to see in the latter part, hear me, in the latter part of the 2020s, we will see biblical type judgments in the nations, including America. We will see biblical type judgments in the nations, including America. I'm not talking about this year or next year or even the year after that. Hear what I'm saying, and I'm not being precise as much as I'm still somewhat being generally specific, but it's not a time to waste. We are going to have major, I saw this in that swell that filled the horizon. I saw cars tumbling over in that swell, dealing with the auto industry. I saw planes crashing into that swell, dealing with the airline industry. I saw food, shown to me as bread, swirling. The Lord spoke directly to me. You're going to have major problems with food shortages. In the realm of supply and demand, demand is going to far outstrip supply. Can you hear that? Demand is going to far outstrip supply and the ability to supply. Please hear what I'm saying. Not only is there going to be a shortages of food, there's going to be a difficulty in supplying that food. The Lord told me directly, if you were wise and if your government was wise, it would encourage farming again. My friends, I'm warning us. I've said some of this stuff before. Looking down the line, if we have 3 or 4 years, please don't waste them. Number one, first and foremost, is the inward issue. Our hearts right here. Receiving God's corrections, His instructions, His warnings, and not refusing His voice that is speaking to us, even now. Heeding God's warnings, not out of fear, but out of obedience. But I will say this again. I've said it before. I guarantee you this. If you are prepared inwardly, and if God leads you, and however He leads you, to prepare some outwardly, you will not regret that. But if you are unprepared, you will regret it. I say that strongly, trying to emphasize the love of God in this. The care of God. God speaking. More and more shakings are coming. More and more shakings. We're seeing now just how shakeable everything is. I would counsel us towards wisdom, not doctrinal delusion. Not my doctrines will save me. They will not. The Lord has always done these things. In the Bible, it is clear. And historically, it is clear. Difficulties have always come. Shakings have always come. All these things, even food supplies being hit. There's going to be, and I want to say this to us, there's going to be contamination come to our food supplies. That's not all. But contamination is coming to grains, to milk, to meat, contamination to vegetables, contamination. I'm not dealing with blight. I'm not dealing with other things right now. I'm talking on simple contamination. So, if you were to go back over 100 years ago, most of the people in this nation were raising their own food. Why is that such a terrible thing to say? That you might want to consider gardening if you can. Why is that harmful to us? Secondly, the price of food in those times, I'm not talking about immediately, but in those times, are going to skyrocket. The price. You'll be thankful that you had some food that you're growing, that have food you're growing and that you set aside. You'll be thankful because of prices. Shortages will be of that nature. Prices will skyrocket. So, things that seem so unshakable are actually quite shakeable because the Lord has been abandoned by this nation for the most part, and the nations. So, that's not 100%, but it's a large percent. Look at the condition of our nation. Look at where things are. We stand on the brink of a division in this nation that could be catastrophic and devastating to this nation. Division. Civil war type things. Civil unrest. This is a time for sobriety. This is a time for humbling ourselves. This is a time of seeking His face. This is a time of going wholeheartedly after the Lord. This is a time to get free of our besetting sin. This is not a time to play games. It's not a time to go back. It's not a time for frivolous activities dominating our entire life. of fun-lovingness dominating our entire being. It's not that time. There's a need for sobriety in this. A need to hear the Lord, to hear what the Spirit of the Lord is saying to the church. God, give us a church in this hour that knows what the Spirit is saying. This is a time, a Psalm 2 type of time, where yes, evil rulers and evil people are doing what they're doing. God's got one thing to say about all that in Psalm 2. Be wise, you rulers, your leaders. Kiss the Son, lest he become angry and you be destroyed in your way. I'm not that majorly concerned about the people. I am concerned about what God is saying and what He's saying to me, what He's saying to His people. I'm concerned about what God is also doing in the judgment beginning at the house of God. And I need to understand what it is God would have us do, particularly in humbling ourselves and repenting and getting our eyes focused again upon the Lord and getting back in the fight, back in the conflict, back in the battle, and back in the war to know the Lord, and for people to get out to the Lord and the lost to see in that humility, to see us humbled before God, to see us no longer finger pointing at the world, but taking our own medicine from the Lord. How about that? Do not be like David and take time out of the battle, time out of the conflict, time out of the wars. No time for that. The giants are still there, even in our own hearts. Giants, by the way, get bigger when we believe they're not there, when we can't see them. But anyway, don't go on to the rooftop and take a time out. Wait on the Lord and allow His strength supernaturally to fill us. So, we're going to see things throughout the 2020 time frame become increasingly difficult. We are not in a time of major biblical type judgments yet, but they're coming, even in the 2020s. They're coming. We will recognize them quickly and easily when they arrive, I hope. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we will immediately recognize them. For some, it's going to be who are more deaf and blind. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. But even there, they will see in time. I want us to pray in closing today. We're no longer in the morning time here. It's been a long message. I pray that it's been helpful to us. Practically speaking, and particularly spiritually speaking, helpful. I pray that we will not be driven by fear, and we surely will be, without the Lord being our internal, unmovable, unshakable foundation and rock. It is not fear that when we hear the Lord, we respond rightly, humbling ourselves. When we hear the Lord, we hear the warnings and take action accordingly and appropriately. That's not fear-driven. That's hearing what the Lord is saying. Those two things are getting mixed up in modernism now. If you respond to what the Lord's saying and people don't like it because they don't like that you're getting ready and they're not, and they just want to believe that nothing's going to happen, and that's easy. That's an easy out for them. But you're hearing that something is going to happen, and you're responding accordingly. People look at you and say, you're in fear. No, actually, you're in faith, and you're responding in obedience and heeding the warning. Let's be clear. It is fear. Fear. One more time. It is fear that causes us to believe that nothing is coming. Fear. That is fear. It is fear that hides and covers up behind its doctrines, believing nothing bad is going to happen when the history of the world is screaming at us all the difficulties that have been in it. And the history of the Scriptures are equally screaming at us at all the difficulties there has been and will be. Wake up and become sober-minded, and realize now is a time to listen, to humble ourselves, to repent, to take hold of the Lord and go deeper than ever before. Go deeper than ever before. That if we're going to waste our lives, let's waste it on the Lord. If we're going to waste our time, let's waste our time on the Lord and go deeper than ever before. That's my prayer as we close this morning, Lord, that we go deeper than ever before. That you give us a burning fire, hunger, and thirst for the Lord Himself. That, Lord, we receive you more than ever before. We believe and we receive. We believe and we receive you. That, Lord, you be an inward rock in us. That, Lord, the fear of God is greater than any other fear. That we are not driven by the fears of man or holding on to this life even. But, Lord, you are the life within us, and you are our comfort. You are our rest. You are our security. You are that to us. Though man slay us, we shall not fear. What can man do to us? They can kill our bodies, but they cannot destroy you and us. And so, Lord, we want to say this morning, be in us greater than what's happening in this world. Be in us greater than what's going to happen in this world. Greater than the intrigues of man, the fear of man, the plans of man, the schemes of man, the schemes of the devil. You, Lord, are greater. You sit in heaven and you laugh at what people are planning and what man and leaders of the nations are planning. You laugh at them and you warn them. I thank you, Lord, that you're that powerful and that personal. Let us, your people, hear what you're saying. See what you're doing. And ask you, do it in us, Lord. Finish your work in us and in the nations. In the name of Jesus. Amen.